While I listened in an extremity of astonishment I need not attempt to describe. A strong and brief gust of wind bore off the incumbent fog as if by a wand of an enchanter. I found myself at the foot of a high mountain and looking down into a vast plain. Through which wound a majestic river. On the margin of this river stood an eastern-looking city, such as we read of in the Arabian tales, but of a character even more singular than any there are described. From my position, which was far above the level of the town, I could perceive its every nook and corner as if delineated on a map. The streets were innumerable and crossed each other irregularly in all directions, but were rather long winding alleys than streets, and absolutely swarmed with inhabitants. The houses were wildly picturesque. On every hand was a wilderness of balconies, of verandas, of minarets, of shrines, and fantastically carved oriels. Bazaars abounded, and there was displayed rich wares in infinite variety and profusion, silks, muslins, the most dazzling cutlery, the most magnificent jewels and gems. Besides these things, were seen on all sides banners and palanquins, litters with stately dames close-veiled, elephants gorgeously caparisoned, idols grotesquely hewn, drums, banners, and gongs, spears, silver, and gilded maces, and amid the crowd and the clamor and the general intricacy of confusion, amid the million of black and yellow men, determined and robed, out of a flowing beard, there roamed a countless multitude of holy filleted bulls, which, while vast legions of the filthy but sacred ape clambered, chattering and shrieking, about the cornices of the mosques, or clung to the minarets and oriels. From the swarming streets to the banks of the river there descended an innumerable flights of steps, leading to the bathing places, where the river itself seemed to force a passage with difficulty through the vast fleets and deeply burdened ships that far and wide encountered its surface. Beyond the limits of the city arose, in the frequent majestic groups, the palm and the cocoa, with other gigantic and weird trees of vast age. And here and there might be seen a field of rice, the thatched hut of a peasant, a tank, a stray temple, a gypsy camp, or of a solitary, graceful maiden taking her way with a pitcher upon her head to the banks of the magnificent river. You will say now, of course, that I dreamed, but not so. What I saw, what I heard, what I felt, what I thought, had about it nothing of the unmistakable idiosyncrasy of a dream. All was rigorously self-consistent. At first doubting that I was really awake, I first entered into a series of tests, which soon convinced me that I really was. Now, when one dreams and in the dream suspects that he has dreams, the suspicion never fails to confirm itself, and the sleeper is almost immediately aroused. Thus, Novalis errs not in saying that we are near waking when we dream that we dream. That had the vision occurred to me as I described it without my suspecting it as a dream, then a dream it might absolutely have been. but occurring as it did, and suspected and tested as it was, I am forced to class it among other phenomena. In this I am not sure you are wrong, observed Dr. Templeton. But proceed. You arose and descended into the city? I arose, continued Bedloe, regarding the doctor with an air of profound astonishment. I arose, as you say, and descended into the city. On my way I fell in with an immense populace, crowding through every avenue, all in the same direction, and exhibiting in every direction the wildest excitement. Very suddenly, and by some inconceivable impulse, I became intensely imbued with personal interest in what was going on. I seemed to feel as if I had an important part to play without exactly understanding what it was. Against the crowd which environed me, however, I experienced a deep sentiment of animosity. I shrank from amid them, and swiftly, by a circuitous path, reached and entered the city. Here all was the wildest tumult and contention. A small party of men clad in garments half Indian, half European, and officered by gentlemen in uniform partly British, were engaged at great odds with the swarming rabble of the alleys. I joined the weaker party, arming myself with the weapons of a fallen officer, and fighting I knew not whom, with the nervous ferocity of despair. We were soon overpowered by numbers and driven to seek refuge in a species of kiosk. Here we barricaded ourselves and for the present were secure. From a loophole near the summit of the kiosk, I perceived a vast crowd in furious agitation, surrounding and assaulting a gay palace that overhung the river. Presently, from an upper window of the palace, descended an effeminate-looking person. By means of a string made of the turbans of his attendants, a boat was at hand, in which he escaped to the opposite side of the river, bank of the river. And now a new object took possession of my soul. I spoke in a few hurried but energetic words to my companions, and having succeeded in gaining over a few of them to my purpose, made a frantic sally from the kiosk. We rushed amid the crowd that surrounded it. They retreated at first before us. They rallied, fought madly, and retreated again. In the meantime, we were borne far from the kiosk, and became bewildered and entangled among those narrow streets of tall, overhanging houses, into the recesses of which the sun has never been able to shine. The rabble pressed impetuously upon us, harassing us with their spears and overwhelming us with their flights of arrows. These latter were very remarkable, and resembled in some respects the writhing crease of the Malay. They were made to imitate the body of the creeping serpent, and were long and black, and with a poisoned barb. One of them struck me upon the right temple. I reeled and fell. An instantaneous and dreadful sickness seized me. I struggled, I gasped, I died. You will hardly persist now, said I, smiling, that the whole of your adventure was not a dream. You are prepared to maintain that you are dead? When I said these words, I of course expected some lively sally from Bedloe in reply, but to my astonishment, he hesitated, trembled, and became fearfully pallid, and remained silent. I looked toward Templeton. He sat erect and rigid in his chair. His teeth chattered, and his eyes were starting from their sockets. Proceed, he at length said hoarsely to Bedloe. For many minutes, continued the latter, my sole sentiment, my sole feeling was that of darkness and non-entity. With the consciousness of death, at length, there seemed to pass a violent and sudden shock through my soul, as if of electricity. With it came the sense of elasticity and of light. This latter I felt, not saw. In an instant I seemed to rise from the ground, but I had no bodily, no visible, audible, or palpable presence. The crowd had departed, the tumult had ceased. The city was in comparative repose. Beneath me lay my corpse, with the arrow in my temple. The whole head had greatly swollen and disfigured. But all these things I felt, not saw. I took interest in nothing. Even the corpse seemed to a matter in which I had no concern. Volition I had none, but appeared to be impelled in emotion, and flitted buoyantly out of the city, and retraced the circuitous path by which I had entered it. When I attained that point of the ravine in the mountains in which I had encountered the hyena, I again experienced the shock of a galvanic battery. The sense of weight of volition of substance returned. I became my original self and bent my steps eagerly homeward. But the past has not lost its vividness of the real, and not now, even for an instant, can I compel my understanding to regard it as a dream. Nor was it, said Templeton with an air of deep solemnity. Yet it would be difficult to say how otherwise it should be termed. Let us suppose only that the soul of the man of today is upon the verge of some stupendous psychical discoveries. Let us content ourselves with a supposition. For the rest I have shown some explanation to make. Here's a watercolor drawing for which I've shown you before, but which an unaccountable sentiment of horror has hitherto prevented me from showing. We looked at the picture which he presented. I saw nothing in it of an extraordinary character, but its effect upon Bedloe was prodigious. He nearly fainted as he gazed, and yet it was but a miniature portrait, a miraculously accurate one to be sure, of his own very remarkable features. At least this was my thought as I regarded it. You will perceive, said Templeton, the date of this picture. It is here, scarcely visible in this corner. 1780. In this year was the portrait taken. It is the likeness of a dead friend, a Mr. Oldham. To whom I became very much attached at Calcutta during the administration of Warren Hastings. I was then only 20 years old, and when I saw you, Mr. Bedloe, at Saratoga, it was miraculous similarity which existed between yourself and the painting which induced me to accost you, to seek your friendship, and to bring about those arrangements which resulted in my becoming your constant companion. In accomplishing this point, I was urged partly, but perhaps principally, by a regretful memory of the deceased, but also in part by an uneasy and altogether horrorless curiosity respecting yourself.